Welcome to the Crying Inside channel, where family stories are told with all honesty and emotion. These are not just stories that bring tears to your eyes, but experiences that leave us all with deep lessons about family love, sacrifice, and resilience. If this is your first time here, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay with us through the upcoming stories. Before we start, I want to ask you a question. What would happen if your own parents treated your children unfairly? They're ready to cast aside the love for the kids they've known for years, just because a new golden grandchild has appeared. Would you choose to stay silent and endure it to keep family peace? Or would you bravely stand up to protect your children, even if it means facing the parents who gave you life and raised you? Today's story is the emotional journey of a single mother. She has had to fight financial struggles while enduring favoritism from her own parents. But above all, she chose love and fairness for her child. This will be a story about tears, struggle, and ultimately, the strength of a mother. Let's follow the story to the end, because maybe within these lines, you'll find yourself, find the pains you've been through, and find hope for a better tomorrow. Denver, October 2022. The late autumn chill was colder than usual, with a biting wind sweeping through the quiet suburban trees. Laura Mitchell, 36, had just finished a 12-hour shift at the Children's Hospital and was driving her old car back to her parents' house. It's the place where she and her two kids had been staying for nearly 2 years. Every step she took entering this house brought a feeling both familiar and strange. Familiar because it was her childhood home. Strange because it had never truly felt like a place where she was completely welcomed. Laura opened the door and immediately smelled leftover food in the kitchen, but she also sensed an unusual atmosphere. The house was unusually quiet, different from every other day. She called out to her children but heard no response. Rushing upstairs to the kids' bedroom, Laura froze when she saw that the room meant for Sophie and Ethan had been completely cleared out. The shelves were empty of toys, and the desk no longer had any notebooks. The room was completely bare, only the scent of freshly used bleach remained. Her heart tightened. She rushed down the stairs, a growing sense of unease rising inside her. The basement door was slightly ajar, dim yellow light glowing below. Laura hurried down, and the scene before her broke her heart into pieces. In the damp basement, with its low ceiling, the musty, moldy smell hit her nose. One corner of the wall still showed blotchy water stains, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. In that cold, empty space, Sophie sat curled up on a makeshift folding bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The little girl clutched an old teddy bear, crying softly while whispering, "I don't want to stay here, Mom. I can't sleep here. It smells bad here, and there are spiders too." Ethan sat beside her, his face sad, but trying to be strong. The boy put his hand on his sister's shoulder and quietly said, "It's okay, Sophie. Mom will be back soon." But in Ethan's eyes, Laura saw deep fear and hurt. Laura felt her head buzzing. Her whole body trembled, both angry and heartbroken. She ran over and hugged the two kids tightly, feeling their shaky breaths and hot tears. She whispered to comfort them, "It's okay. Mom's here now. Everything will be all right." But rage was boiling inside her chest. Laura quickly went upstairs to find her parents and brother. In the living room, her father Thomas was talking with Ryan, Laura's younger brother. On the table, Kelly, Ryan's wife, was holding baby Noah, their 1-year-old, the family's golden child. Their relaxed atmosphere was completely opposite to the despair Laura had just witnessed. Laura asked sharply, "Who moved my kids' stuff to the basement?" The room suddenly went silent. Thomas took a sip of tea and looked at his daughter calmly. "We just rearranged a bit. Noah needed more space, and Kelly needed a workspace. Your kids are growing up. They can adapt." Laura was stunned, unable to believe what she heard. Her daughter was forced to sleep in the damp basement just because their golden grandchild needed more room. She looked at her mother, Margaret, hoping for some opposition, but she just folded her arms and whispered, "You're overreacting. It's just a bedroom." Ryan shrugged and gave a faint smile. "Honestly, it makes sense. Noah is still little and needs a better environment. Ethan and Sophie are at school all day, so wherever they sleep doesn't really matter." Laura felt a flush spread through her body, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't believe her own parents could dismiss their grandchildren's feelings like that. Her voice trembled, but was firm. My kids deserve a clean, safe room, just like any other child. You can't treat them this way just because Noah is your golden grandchild." Margaret sighed, her tone tinged with reproach. "You always think Mom and Dad play favorites." "You're just too sensitive, Laura." Laura went numb. Those words felt like a knife, twisting deep in her heart. She heard nothing but her pounding heart and Sophie's quiet sobs echoing in her mind. In that moment, Laura realized the line had been crossed. This was no longer about sharing space or a temporary arrangement. This was rejection, a declaration that her child was less valuable, simply because he was her brother's son. Laura Mitchell, 36, is a pediatric nurse working at a children's hospital in Denver. Her life hasn't been easy, but it's full of resilience and love for her twin children. Since she was young, Laura dreamed of working with kids. She spent 8 years persevering through school, pulling late nights studying and working extra shifts to earn her Bachelor of Science in Nursing. Holding her BSN diploma, Laura knew it was not just an achievement for herself, but a stepping stone to raise her children with her own hands. Many young patients grew attached to her because of her warm smile and gentle words. But behind the hospital lights was a lonely woman, fighting every day to balance a demanding job and motherhood. Laura married in her early 20s. She and her ex-husband spent 12 years together, believing they would be forever. But that marriage ended in 2020 when she discovered he was cheating. This shock not only shattered Laura's heart, but also pushed her into a crisis both mentally and financially. From a well-off family, she suddenly faced divorce, receiving only minimal alimony and the burden of raising 2 young children. Still, Laura never allowed herself to give up. She decided to work full-time at the hospital, taking extra shifts to make ends meet and save for her children's future. In the eyes of her colleagues, she was a strong nurse. But in her small room at night, Laura would sometimes quietly cry, exhausted and worried about Sophie and Ethan's future. Her 2 kids were her greatest motivation to keep going. Ethan, her 1 0-year-old twin son, had already shown a clear talent for art. He loved drawing, often sitting for hours at his desk with colored pencils, creating his own characters and worlds. However, Ethan was quite sensitive and easily hurt when criticized or compared to others. Laura understood this, so she always tried to protect and encourage her son, hoping his creativity wouldn't be crushed by harsh words from others. Sophie, Ethan's twin sister, had a very different personality. She was lively, strong-willed, and loved sports and music. Sophie often played on the school basketball team and practiced the clarinet passionately. Unlike Ethan, Sophie wasn't afraid to speak up against injustice, and always stood up for her friends and even her brother when she saw something wrong. Laura saw herself in Sophie when she was young, but much stronger and more determined. After the divorce, Laura took her 2 kids to live temporarily at her parents' house in Denver. She thought it would be a short-term solution, and that within a year she'd have enough to rent her own place. But that temporary period stretched to nearly 2 years, and during this time, the family's simmering conflicts began to erupt. Laura had always been a girl who lived properly. She was a rule follower as a child, always getting good grades and never causing her parents to worry. In contrast, her younger brother Ryan was the one their parents spoiled. Even though he struggled in school, he was still supported to start his career and now lived comfortably. Since she was a child, Laura was used to comparisons and favoritism. But she never expected that as an adult. After so much effort and years of sacrifice, she and her children would still be placed lower just because of a newborn grandson. What makes Laura different is her fierce maternal instinct. Even working 12-hour days, sometimes long night shifts, she still made time to care for and encourage her kids. On rare days off, she took her children to the park or organized small movie nights in their bedroom. Laura even hung a savings chart in the bathroom, where the 3 of them marked every penny saved until they could move out on their own. It wasn't just a financial plan, but a beacon of hope for Sophie and Ethan to hold on to during the unfair treatment they faced in their grandparents' house. Laura knew she wasn't perfect. She was exhausted to the point of wanting to give up, having nights where she cried alone in her car after a shift. But every time she saw Ethan's sad eyes or Sophie's fragile resilience, she stood back up. She believed that with love and persistence, the 3 of them would find a true home where no one was seen as less just because they weren't the golden grandchild. Laura Mitchell's story isn't just the tragedy of a single mother, it's a reflection of many families. In today's society, there are still children forgotten, still mothers carrying all the weight so their kids can be treated equally and loved. And Laura, through everything she's been through, is proof that a mother's love can overcome all prejudice and favoritism to give her children a future they deserve. The home of Margaret and Thomas's parents is in a quiet suburb of Denver, Colorado. It's the typical two-story wooden house common in the U.S., with a garage, a small front yard with a white picket fence, and a backyard where the family often hosts weekend barbecues. From the outside, the house feels warm and traditional, but inside, deep conflicts exist that few can see. In typical American families, shared activities like Sunday church, neighborhood barbecues, or Thanksgiving dinners are times for everyone to bond. The Mitchell family was no exception. Every Sunday morning, Margaret usually takes the whole family to church, sitting in their usual pew in the left corner. After the service, they often stop by a small coffee shop near home to have breakfast together. That tradition continues regularly, but ever since Ryan had a child, all the attention during services has focused on the precious grandchild. The church community also praises Noah as a sweet child, while almost no one pays attention to Ethan and Sophie anymore. Backyard barbecues used to be the times when Laura and her kids felt the most at ease. They could play ball, laugh with the neighbors, and for a moment forget the tension at home. But since Ryan and Kelly moved in, that space has changed too. Noah is placed in a new high chair. The whole family gathers around him, while Ethan and Sophie are reminded to be quiet and not run around noisily. Thanksgiving used to be Laura's favorite day. That's when she and her mother would prepare the turkey, make pumpkin pies, and the whole family would gather around the table. But last year, everything was different. The food was cooked to Ryan and Kelly's tastes, and the conversations at the table only revolved around Ryan's success and Noah's cuteness. Ethan and Sophie just sat quietly, sometimes looking at their mom as if silently asking why their grandparents no longer cared about them like before. Laura tried to hide the pain, served more food to her children, and forced a smile, but inside she clearly felt the divide. The family's divide became more obvious. Laura worked hard, took night shifts, and saved every penny for the future. She budgeted carefully, only buying new clothes for her children when necessary, often choosing simple but nutritious meals to save money. Even trips to the park or the movies with her kids were carefully planned to stay within budget. Meanwhile, Ryan and Kelly lived comfortably, with their parents supporting almost everything. They have a spacious house in the suburbs, but still moved back in temporarily while their house was being renovated. Kelly spares no expense shopping for Noah, from designer baby clothes to a high chair costing hundreds of dollars that's only used for a few months. Laura's parents are always ready to spend money on them, taking it for granted, while Laura herself gets complaints about even the cost of asthma medicine for Ethan. The American cultural picture is clear in every detail. In a country that values independence, Laura is trying to do just that, standing on her own feet and rebuilding her life after the crisis. But the irony is that her own parents don't see that effort. Instead of encouragement, they hold on to old mindsets, seeing the son as the center, while no matter how strong the daughter is, she's just a shadow on the side. That gap isn't just material, but emotional too. In a typical American home where everyone expects equality and opportunity, Laura and her kids live with discrimination and comparison. And that's what planted the seed for the bold decision Laura would soon make, a decision that would completely change the lives of her and her two kids. March 2021, the Denver sky was still cold, with a thin layer of snow covering the roofs in the suburbs. In that atmosphere, the Mitchell family welcomed a new member. Ryan, Laura's younger brother, and his wife Kelly had just had their first son. The baby was named Noah, a name Margaret and Thomas proudly repeated to anyone they met. From the day Noah was born, favoritism was obvious. Margaret beamed as she told her church friends that she officially had a grandson. Large photos of Noah were printed and hung right in the living room, taking the central spot that used to be for photos of Laura and her two kids. No one mentioned Sophie or Ethan anymore, the only grandchildren for the past 10 years. Laura sat nearby, congratulating her brother while swallowing her bitterness. She was happy Noah was healthy, but deep down, it hurt to see her own children pushed aside. Ethan and Sophie were excitedly preparing handmade gifts to welcome their cousin, but when they presented the painting and the small bracelet they made themselves, Kelly just gave a polite smile and quickly set them aside to show off the expensive new rocking chair gifted to Noah. Just 1 month after Noah was born, the changes in Margaret and Thomas's home became even more obvious. One afternoon, when Laura came home from work, she was surprised to find that the large dining room, usually reserved for family celebrations, had been turned into a fancy nursery. The walls were repainted, a light blue, decorated with pictures of teddy bears and skies. A shiny wooden crib was placed in the center of the room, next to a rocking chair and shelves full of toys. Laura stood frozen, staring at the scene. She knew Ryan and Kelly lived in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, with enough space for Noah to have his own room. But instead of keeping him there, they brought everything to Margaret and Thomas's house for easier babysitting. Margaret explained cheerfully. You see, it's wonderful that Noah has his own room right here. That way, Grandma and Grandpa can take care of him anytime. Laura tried to suppress a sigh. In her mind, she pictured Sophie and Ethan crammed into a small room, their belongings squeezed to make space for someone else's needs. Now even the shared dining room had turned into Noah's private world. The family meal, once a place for everyone to connect, had been sacrificed to serve a child who already had too many privileges. Thomas looked extremely proud. He walked around the room, showing Laura each new item they had bought. This is the most modern stroller, which folds up with just the press of a button. This is an imported bottle warmer, making things easier for Kelly. Laura forced a smile, thanking her parents for their care for the baby, but inside she felt completely abandoned. She couldn't remember the last time her parents bought Sophie and Ethan something new. Even on birthdays, their gifts were often discounted clothes, while Noah, just a few months old, already had a luxurious room fit for a little prince. Sophie noticed the clear difference. One time, when she saw the new crib, she asked her mother, "Mom, why does Noah have his own room here, but my brother and I still have to share a small room?" Laura choked up, trying to explain. "Because Noah is still little. Grandma and Grandpa want to take care of him more." But Sophie shook her head, her little eyes shining with hurt. "I think Grandma and Grandpa love Noah more than us." That sentence kept echoing in Laura's mind. She knew her daughter was sensitive and perceptive, and the grandparents' favoritism was slowly leaving invisible scars on her children's hearts. Ethan was quieter, but Laura saw the sadness in his eyes every time he was ignored after showing a new drawing. Noah was too young to understand, but he had become the center of attention, turning the whole family upside down. Noah's arrival was like a storm, exposing cracks that had long been there. Margaret and Thomas had always favored Ryan over Laura. Now, with their grandson, that favoritism became even more blatant. Laura felt like she and her 2 kids were uninvited guests, struggling to find their place in the very home they once called their sanctuary. During long hospital nights, Laura often remembered how the dining room was turned into a nursery. She quietly wondered if there would ever be a day when she and her children truly had a place to call home. A place where no one could push them aside, where no one saw them as less worthy than others. That thought brought her both pain and a small spark of hope. Maybe one day she would have to choose to leave, to protect her children's fairness and dignity. In the months after Noah was born, the house in the Denver suburbs slowly changed. The family atmosphere seemed lively with the arrival of a new baby, but for Laura and her 2 kids, it was a time gradually stained with injustice. Christmas 2021 was a clear example. Under the beautifully decorated Christmas tree in the living room, Noah's gifts piled up big and small boxes, from electronic toy cars to designer baby clothes. When it was Ethan and Sophie's turn to open gifts, he only got a cheap colored box, and Sophie just a thin knitted scarf. Both kids still tried to smile and thank their grandparents, but Laura saw the disappointment and hurt in their eyes that they couldn't hide. While the whole family chatted happily, praising Noah for looking adorable in his new high chair, Sophie and Ethan curled up quietly, trying to hide their feelings by looking down and fiddling with the small gift in their hands. Laura watched silently. Her heart ached, but she didn't want to spoil the festive mood. She gently stroked her kids' heads and whispered, "Don't worry, Mom will make it up to you later. We'll have another Christmas, just the 3 of us." Ethan nodded, while Sophie looked at her mom intently, her young eyes filled with suspicion. It seemed like she already understood that her grandparents weren't as fair as they used to be. The favoritism didn't just stop at gifts. It crept into every daily moment. One afternoon, when Sophie was practicing the clarinet in the living room, Margaret frowned and said, "Can you practice somewhere quieter? Noah needs to sleep." The sound of the clarinet echoing through the house annoyed her. Laura explained that Sophie needed to practice on schedule because it was an assignment from her teacher. But her explanation was quickly dismissed. On the other hand, when Noah cried loudly in the middle of the night, the whole family immediately rushed to comfort him. Kelly held him, Ryan soothed him, Margaret prepared milk, and Thomas carried Noah around the house. No one complained that the crying kept them awake. The stark contrast made Sophie burst into tears. One night, she whispered to her mom, "Why do I get scolded when I play music, but when Noah cries loudly, everyone says he's adorable?" Laura held her close, choking back tears, unable to say a word. Ethan, who was usually quieter, couldn't hide his sadness either. One time, he brought a drawing of the family having dinner together to show his grandmother. But Margaret just glanced at it and set it aside, saying she was busy making milk for Noah. The drawing lay there on the table, with no praise and no warm glance. Ethan quietly put the drawing into his backpack, and from that day on, he drew much less. Laura witnessed it all, her heart breaking. But she gritted her teeth and endured. Every time the kids seemed sad, she comforted them. "Just be patient a little longer. Mom promises we'll have our own house. You'll each have your own room, a music corner, and a big drawing table." Ethan and Sophie listened to their mom and tried to trust her. On the bathroom wall, the savings chart was updated daily, showing how much Laura had saved. Every time they looked at it, the two kids felt a spark of hope. Laura knew that resisting now would only make things more tense. She needed her parents to watch the kids while she worked night shifts, and she needed to save a few more months to have enough for the rental deposit. But the more she endured, the clearer it became that the favoritism in this house wasn't temporary. It had become a habit, even a deeply held belief in her parents' minds that Noah deserved more, while Ethan and Sophie had to learn to give way. Deep down, Laura understood this unfairness was leaving invisible wounds on her children. But she chose silence, choosing sacrifice to buy more time to prepare for the day they'd leave. Every night, after finishing her shift and driving back to that house, Laura would tell herself, "Just a few more months. Just a little more patience. Then the three of us will finally have a place we can truly call home." Summer 2022, Denver was hotter than usual. Laura kept working long hospital shifts, trying to save every penny for the plan to rent a house. Just 3 more months, she calculated, enough to cover the deposit to get her 2 kids out. But one evening, just as she came home, Laura saw the whole family gathered in the living room. Ryan and Kelly sat in the middle of the sofa, their faces bright with excitement. Margaret and Thomas looked unusually joyful. Ryan spoke first. "Sis, I've got good news. Our house is about to get a complete makeover. We've hired contractors, and they'll start next month. The work will take about 2 months. So during that time, our whole family will move in here temporarily." Laura was speechless. She looked around and saw her mother beaming. "This is wonderful, finally. The whole family will be together. This house will be filled with children's laughter. So happy." Thomas nodded in agreement. "That's right, the whole family united." Laura swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "But, Mom and Dad, this house is already crowded. Me and the 2 kids are living here too. If Ryan and Kelly move in, and Noah as well, it's going to be really packed. The kids won't have enough living space." Margaret's expression changed immediately. "Laura, you have to understand. Family means helping each other. Ryan and Kelly are going through a tough time. The house repairs are expensive and stressful. You and the kids are just staying temporarily. You can be flexible and give up some space for a while." Her mother's words felt like a knife stabbing Laura's heart. She kept hearing the word, "give up space," over and over. Clearly, she and her 2 kids were just temporary guests in the house she grew up in. Ryan and Kelly, who already had a spacious home, were seen as the true owners, while she and her kids were just obstacles. When Laura objected, Ryan gave a cold smile. "Just a few weeks, that's all. Sophie and Ethan are older now. The kids can adapt. Noah is still little and needs more care." "I think you understand that too," Thomas interrupted firmly. "It's decided. Ryan and Kelly will move in here. Laura, you have to put the family's interests before your own pride." Laura stayed silent, her lips trembling. In her mind, she saw Ethan's sleepless nights full of worry, Sophie holding back tears because she was pushed aside. She clearly saw the dark future waiting for her and her kids. But she also knew that opposing now would only make things worse. In the following weeks, the tension exploded. Ryan and Kelly officially moved in. They brought clothes, belongings, a stroller, and a bunch of big boxes. Margaret rearranged the house to make room for them. A secondary living room was turned into a bedroom for Ryan and Kelly. The dining room remained Noah's care room. Laura and her 2 kids were squeezed into a tiny, cramped room with barely enough space to turn around. On the first day Ryan moved in, Kelly casually hung her clothes in Laura's mom's closet, pushing Laura's old clothes to one side. Laura tried to be patient, but Sophie looked at her mother with disappointment. The girl was old enough to understand that her family was being disrespected. The atmosphere at home grew increasingly tense. Noah was spoiled endlessly, while Ethan and Sophie were constantly scolded. When Sophie played the clarinet, Kelly immediately complained about the noise. When Ethan left a pencil on the table, Thomas sharply reminded him. But when Noah cried, everyone rushed over to comfort him, as if it were natural. One evening, Laura quietly spoke to her 2 children. "Just a few more months. We will leave here." Ethan nodded, while Sophie whispered, "I don't believe it anymore, Mom. Grandma and Grandpa will never change." Laura held her daughter close, her heart tightening. The silent tension had turned into open conflict. Laura was no longer treated as an equal family member. Her parents openly sided with Ryan and Kelly. Ethan and Sophie were no longer seen as grandchildren, but just as boarders. In her parents' cold eyes, Laura realized a painful truth. This house was no longer a place for her and her 2 children. The house in Denver was never spacious, and now it felt cramped and suffocating. Ryan, Kelly, and Noah's presence filled every corner with belongings. But what hurt Laura most wasn't the cramped space, it was how her parents divided their attention, always favoring Ryan's family. Noah, the youngest grandchild, was given every priority. The large living room was rearranged to hold a crib, a walker, and toys. Margaret carefully bought soft rugs, new curtains, and even hired someone to clean the carpets to make sure Noah didn't breathe in dust. Meanwhile, Ethan and Sophie's room grew smaller, darker, and the damp smell from the basement caused the kids to cough at night several times. But when Laura mentioned this, Thomas just waved it off. "Stop complaining, Laura. You should be grateful that you still have a place to live." One weekend afternoon, Ethan nervously brought home an invitation from school. He was selected to participate in the citywide student art exhibition. Ethan's painting, showing the whole family sitting around the dinner table under warm lighting, really impressed the teacher. Ethan hoped his grandmother and mother would come along to cheer him on. The boy happily showed the letter during dinner, but Margaret just glanced at it and put the letter down on the table. That week, she was busy helping Kelly pick new curtains for the bedroom. A small school exhibition wasn't as important as Noah needing a really nice room. Ethan hung his head, his hands trembling as he clenched the letter tightly. Laura saw the sadness dim in her son's eyes, but didn't dare argue loudly at the dinner table. That night, Ethan quietly sat in his room, gathering the unfinished paintings and putting them away in the drawer. Since then, he painted a lot less. Sophie's passion for music was also limited. She was passionate about the clarinet and practiced for an hour every day. But ever since Noah moved in, the clarinet was considered the enemy of sleep. Margaret ordered, "Sophie, you're not allowed to play the clarinet in the house anymore. Noah needs quiet." Kelly nodded in agreement, and Ryan added, "You can practice later, when Noah is older. The music can wait." Sophie choked up, hugging her clarinet like it was a piece of her heart. That night, she crawled under the covers crying and asked her mom, "Why do I have to stop just because of Noah?" Laura didn't know how to answer. She could only hold her daughter and whisper that one day, Sophie would be able to play music freely in her own home. These conflicts piled up, making the family atmosphere tense. Laura was often criticized by her parents. Whenever she spoke up to defend her kids, Margaret snapped, "Laura, you're being selfish. You're just jealous of Ryan because he has a happier family." Thomas joined in. "That's right. You should learn to think of others, instead of holding on to your pride." They didn't see the hurt in Ethan's eyes, or hear Sophie's choked sobs. They only saw a rebellious Laura, who was jealous of her brother. One evening, after work, Laura found Sophie sitting on the porch, her clarinet resting on her lap, her small hands gently touching the keys. The girl's eyes were distant and tired, like a miniature grown-up. Laura sat down beside her and listened to her heavy sighs. She knew that every day in this house, the dreams and joys of these two kids were being chipped away. It wasn't just the kids. Laura herself was under increasing pressure. Ryan and Kelly treated the house like it was theirs. Kelly complained about how Laura cooked, and Ryan criticized her for not earning as much as he did. Once, Ryan bluntly said, "You should be grateful your parents still let you stay here. Otherwise, you and the kids wouldn't know where to go." Those words left Laura speechless. Every night, watching her two kids curled up in the cramped room, Laura silently promised she'd find a way to get them out of this situation. But her finances weren't enough yet. Her savings were still lacking. She knew she had to endure more, but she also knew the invisible wounds her family was suffering wouldn't heal easily. The conflict in that house was escalating, like a balloon stretching tighter, waiting to burst. And Laura knew that day was not far off. That September, as the first autumn winds began to blow through the Denver suburbs, Laura was still working her regular 12-hour shifts at the children's hospital. She always believed that while she was away, her parents would take care of the kids no matter how strict they were. But that night, coming home after a long, exhausting day, Laura witnessed a scene that shattered her heart. The basement door was slightly ajar, a musty, sharp smell drifting out, along with soft, dry coughing. Laura hurried downstairs and found Ethan and Sophie huddled on two old mattresses next to some scattered cardboard boxes. Sophie's eyes were red from crying, her hair tangled, while Ethan clutched his backpack tightly as if afraid someone would take it. When they saw their mother, both ran over, bursting into loud sobs. "Mom, Grandma, and Uncle Ryan made us sleep down here," Sophie sobbed, her voice trembling. Ethan stayed silent, but his eyes were full of confusion and hurt. Laura froze for a moment, then a wave of anger surged inside her. She stormed up to the living room where Ryan and her father were sitting, talking as if nothing was wrong. "Dad, why? Why would you let my kids sleep in the basement?" Laura's voice shook but was full of rage. Thomas set his coffee cup down, looking straight at his daughter. "This isn't just your house. Ryan and Kelly need more space for Noah. The upstairs has to be prioritized for the little one. Sophie and Ethan are fine. They're just sleeping there temporarily." Hearing this, Laura was stunned. Temporarily sleeping? She looked around the spacious house, where the dining room had been turned into Noah's room, every corner filled with his toys. Meanwhile, her two kids were pushed down to a damp, dark basement, neglected and ignored. Ryan crossed his arms and gave a cold smile. "You're overreacting. Kids can sleep anywhere. You should be reasonable and stop making everything tense." Laura clenched her fists tight. "How can you say that when my kids have to stay in a cramped room, while yours are treated like royalty?" Margaret stepped out of the kitchen, frowning. "Laura, you're starting again. You always make everything a big deal. Noah is still little and needs more care. Ethan and Sophie are older. They can adapt. You should stop being selfish." Selfish. That word stabbed deep into Laura's heart. She looked over at her two kids still standing by the basement door, eyes full of worry. This wasn't just about where to sleep. It was about dignity, about her children's childhood being trampled on. Laura stepped forward, her voice firm. "I can't accept this. Kids aren't objects to be placed wherever you want. They're human beings. They're my children. If you two can't be fair, then at least let me protect my children." Thomas sighed, shaking his head. "You're just exhausted from work and getting upset too easily. Ryan, stop picking on your sister." Those words poured fuel on the fire. Laura felt belittled, treated like an unreasonable weakling. But the worst pain was seeing helplessness in her son's eyes. Ethan gently tugged on his mom's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, just let it go. I'm okay." That sentence hurt Laura even more. Her 10-year-old son had to learn to endure instead of just being a carefree kid. That night, Laura sat with her two kids in the basement. The wind howled through the old window cracks. The damp smell lingered, but what choked her was the shame and injustice. Sophie hugged her clarinet like a charm, while Ethan lay facing the wall, his shoulders trembling. Laura held her kids' hands, promising she'd find a way to fix this. "I swear I won't let you go through this again." In the darkness, Laura's tears fell, mixing with the pain and rising anger inside her. That night, she knew things had gone too far. This is no longer a silent conflict. It's now an open crack in the family, a wound that's hard to heal. And inside Laura, a new determination is forming, stronger and fiercer than ever before. One October evening, the whole family gathered for dinner in the grandparents' large dining room. On the table were grilled meat, mashed potatoes, and fragrant pumpkin pie. Laura had just finished her shift and hurried home to sit down with her children. She hoped the meal might somehow ease the heavy atmosphere, but what awaited her was a painful memory she would never forget. Noah, just 2 years old, sat in a high chair. The mischievous little boy scooped up a handful of mashed potatoes with his spoon and accidentally dropped it onto the floor. Food splattered all over the table and even onto the pristine white tablecloth. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Then Kelly laughed warmly. "Oh my, Noah is so adorable, just look at him." Margaret immediately stood up, grabbed a napkin, and bent down to kiss her little grandson on the forehead. Thomas laughed, praising Noah's lively nature. Everyone around laughed too, as if it was a sweet moment. Laura sat quietly, forcing a smile. Meanwhile, Ethan, now called Jack, sat beside her, silently watching the scene. The boy softly asked, "Mom, can I have another sandwich?" Before he finished speaking, Thomas frowned and interrupted. "You're always asking for things. We've prepared a whole feast. And you want something else? How can you be so ungrateful?" Suddenly, the room fell into a heavy silence. Ethan lowered his head, his small hands clenched tightly together. Sophie tried to speak up, but was stopped by Kelly's look. Laura felt her blood boil, but she held herself back. She was afraid that if she exploded now, everything would turn into a disaster. After dinner, when everyone left the table, Ethan grabbed his mother's hand and whispered a question Laura would carry with her for life. "Mom, why am I never as good as Noah?" His eyes glistened with tears, a desperate look searching for an explanation. Laura's heart felt like it was shattering. She held her child tightly, but in her mind 1,000 screams echoed. Why did a 10-year-old child have to ask that question? Why was her son, obedient and talented, treated like an outsider in his own family? That night, Laura couldn't sleep. The wind blowing through the trees outside the window reminded her of her loneliness. Ethan and Sophie had fallen asleep after a long day, but their faces still showed exhaustion and sadness. Laura sat silently by the table, holding a cold cup of tea, her eyes empty. Ethan's question kept repeating in her mind. Why am I never good enough? She knew she couldn't keep living in that house. The biased dinners, the baseless blame, the unfair treatment had all left deep marks on her children's memories. If it continued, those emotional wounds would never heal. Laura suddenly realized that silent endurance was no longer an option. From that day on, she began making a secret plan. She researched the rent for a small apartment near the hospital, where there was a good elementary school for Ethan and Sophie. She quietly opened a separate savings account, transferring small amounts from her monthly salary into it. Every penny was her hard-earned money, but also hope for a new home where her kids could live with love and fairness. Laura also started gathering important documents, from the kids' birth certificates to their school records. She hid them in a cloth bag, tucked under the drawer of her desk at the hospital. She knew if her parents found out, they would try to stop her. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, Laura quietly looked up information about single mother support programs in Denver. She carefully took notes, planning each step for their departure. Every day, she still faced favoritism and coldness in the family. But now, instead of arguing, Laura chose silence. She knew that anything she said would just be seen as oversensitivity or jealousy. Instead of wasting energy, she focused all her determination on protecting her children. One evening, when Sophie was stopped from practicing the clarinet because Noah needed to sleep, Laura quietly held her daughter and whispered, "Be patient a little longer, sweetheart. We'll soon have our own place where you can play music all day without anyone stopping you." Sophie nodded, her eyes shining with a small glimmer of hope. So did Ethan. He started drawing more, using cheap sheets of paper to sketch their dream room. In his drawings, there was a big window filled with light and a simple but cozy bed. Laura looked at those pictures, her throat tightening. She knew her son was pouring his dreams into the idea of a real home. Day by day, Laura's determination grew stronger. She was no longer the woman who just endured and sacrificed. Inside her burned the fire of a mother, ready to do anything for her children's happiness. And it was Ethan's heartbreaking question that became her biggest motivation. Laura understood that to protect her kids, she had to dare to leave the home she grew up in. Though it was the hardest decision of her life, she believed love and fairness were the true foundations of a family. That night, in the quiet darkness, Laura whispered a promise. "Kids, I will get us out of this place. I'll give you a real home." In early November, Denver's weather started to turn chilly. Yellow leaves covered the backyard, and the wind howling through the cracks made the already heavy house feel even gloomier. While Ryan and Kelly and their son were treated like honored guests, Laura felt more and more like a stranger in her own parents' home. But what no one in the family knew was that Laura had been quietly planning for months. From night shifts at the hospital, she took on extra hours, even weekend shifts that many coworkers avoided. After a long, tiring shift, she didn't go home right away, but sat quietly in the staff room, silently counting the small amount of salary transferred to her personal account. She didn't spend a dime on herself, only keeping a little for necessities, saving every penny toward her one goal, leaving this house. After many months, she finally had enough money for Laura to sign a lease on a small apartment near the children's hospital where she worked. It was a modest apartment with 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a simple kitchen. But the important thing was that it was clean, bright, and most importantly, the air there would be shared only by her and her kids. Laura carefully hid the lease agreement in her briefcase. Every time she went to work, she would take it out and look at it as a reminder that freedom was close. But the apartment wouldn't be ready for another 2 weeks. So for now, she and her children still had to live with her parents, enduring injustice every day. Just then, a surprise came for Laura. Nancy, a close colleague from the pediatrics department, happened to hear Laura sigh during break time. After several gentle questions, Laura revealed a bit about her situation. Nancy was silent for a few seconds, then squeezed Laura's hand tightly. "If you need it, you and your kids can stay at my place for a few days. I have a spare room. I'm not rich, but at least you and your kids will have a decent place to sleep." Laura was so touched that tears fell right there in the break room. She never expected that during such tough days, someone would open their arms and accept her so sincerely. Nancy's offer was like a light at the end of the tunnel, a reassurance that she was not alone. That evening, Laura went home to face the familiar scene. Dinner still revolved around Noah. Her parents were still laughing and joking, Ryan and Kelly proudly showing off their child, while Ethan and Sophie quietly ate their portions. Laura sat down at the table, no longer angry like before, but with a strange calmness. She knew this would be one of the last meals under this roof. When Ryan sneered that Laura was always complaining, and if she was unhappy, she could just move out, and Margaret chimed in that Laura was too sensitive, Laura suddenly stood up. The room fell silent. Her eyes lit up, full of determination. "Kids, pack your bags. We're leaving." Those words rang out clearly, sharply cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a knife. But what choked Laura up were Ethan and Sophie's eyes. In those eyes, there was surprise, quickly turning into a blazing hope. Ethan hurriedly put down his spoon, rushed to his room, and grabbed his old backpack. Sophie also frantically gathered a few clothes and her beloved clarinet. The hurried footsteps, the zipper sounds, and the sniffles mixed with joy turned the whole house upside down. Margaret stood up abruptly, her voice trembling. "Are you crazy, Laura? This is your home. You can't just drag the kids out over some pride." But Laura didn't look back. She spoke firmly. "This isn't a home. A home is where love and fairness exist. If my children are disrespected here, then this is just 4 cold walls." Thomas stepped forward, his voice harsh. "You think life out there is easier? You'll have to come back here eventually." But Laura just gave a bitter smile. "Life out there might be tough, but at least my kids will sleep in a clean room, be respected, and be themselves. That's what matters most." Nancy waited outside the gate, the car's headlights lighting the path. Laura led her 2 kids out, leaving behind the shocked and angry stares. Her heart raced, filled with both worry and relief. Ethan and Sophie held their mom's hands tightly, their faces still streaked with tears, but now showing clear smiles. When the car door closed, Laura looked through the rearview mirror. The house where she grew up was now just a distant shadow in the dark. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But at least she and her kids had taken an important step. They had chosen freedom. The door behind Laura closed, but the echoes of the confrontation still lingered in every breath. In the dining room, Margaret stood stunned, her hands trembling. She looked at Thomas, then turned to Ryan and Kelly, her voice choked with anger and sorrow. That girl is really ungrateful. All these years we gave her a place to live, and now she takes her child away like we're the bad guys. Thomas was silent for a moment, then slammed his hand down on the table. She thinks she can just go out there and take care of herself? Life's not that easy. In just a few weeks she'll come back here, begging us to let her stay. And when that happens, I'll make sure she tastes regret. Ryan leaned back in his chair, smiling half-heartedly. He didn't look upset, but somehow satisfied. Laura always acts like she's better than everyone else. Let's see how long she lasts out there. Kelly sat nearby, nodding slightly in agreement, as her eyes glanced over at their son Noah, who was still playing with his spoon. In their eyes, Laura had cut ties with the family herself. Meanwhile, Nancy's car rolled down the tree-lined suburban street. In the back seat, Ethan and Sophie sat quietly, clutching their backpacks tightly. Their eyes were still red, but their faces showed relief. Laura turned to look at her two kids, placing her hand on their shoulders. From now on, things will be different. Nancy drove in silence for a while, then softly said, "You did the right thing, Laura. No one deserves to go through that, especially the little ones." Laura choked up, only able to nod. Inside, she felt vague worries, but also a spark of hope. Nancy's house was in a quiet neighborhood near the hospital. It wasn't a fancy mansion, just a simple 2-story home with a small front yard, a few flower pots, and a porch with the scent of wood. When they stepped inside, Sophie took a deep breath and said something that made Laura's heart tighten. "Mom, here I finally feel like I can breathe." Laura stood still. All the frustration she'd held inside suddenly burst out. Just one sentence from her daughter was enough to prove that her decision was right. Ethan nodded too, his small hand gripping his mother's like he wanted to show he completely trusted her. That night, Nancy prepared a warm bedroom for the 3 of them. Even though it was just 2 single beds pushed together and a few simple items, the atmosphere full of kindness brought Laura to tears. Sophie lay down on the bed, gently smiling. "I've never seen a room this beautiful." Ethan took out paper and pen, starting to draw the room with excited scribbled lines. Meanwhile, at the old house, Margaret stayed awake all night. Although she called her daughter ungrateful, deep down she felt an emptiness that couldn't be filled. Sophie's laughter, Ethan's drawings, and Laura quietly doing housework, all of it was now gone. She didn't want to admit it, but the house suddenly felt strangely cold. Thomas was different. He stayed tough. He believed Laura would fail and come back. To him, it was just a matter of time. Ryan and Kelly were almost gleeful. They thought the house was now completely theirs, and Noah would be the absolute center of attention. But they had no idea that their arrogance blinded them to what was coming. In the days that followed, Laura began to reorganize her life. She worked night shifts at the hospital while using the daytime to sign the official lease with the new apartment owner. Nancy not only let them stay, but also helped Laura take care of the kids when she was busy. Ethan and Sophie had simple but warm dinners and slept in a room free of musty smells. One afternoon after school, Sophie sat by Nancy's window, sunlight shining on her golden hair. She turned to her mom and whispered, "I just want to say I'm happy we left. I feel like we escaped from a cage." Laura hugged her, tears streaming down, but these were tears of liberation. Deep down, Laura knew the battle with her family wasn't over. They might try to pull her back or accuse her of being cruel, but right now, she wasn't afraid anymore. She had determination, her 2 kids by her side, and most importantly, faith in a fresh start. Night fell, and as she watched her 2 children sleeping soundly in the small bed, Laura smiled and whispered, "Everything will be okay. As long as Mom is here, as long as we're together, anywhere can be home." That November, winter blanketed Denver with thick layers of white frost. Laura officially moved her 2 kids into a small but bright 3-bedroom rental house. It wasn't a fancy house, but the freshly painted light blue walls and the small wooden table in the kitchen symbolized a new beginning. As she set the last box down on the floor, Laura took a deep breath. She knew this was the place where her little family could live as themselves, free from comparisons or favoritism. Ethan, after months of sadness and withdrawal, slowly regained his spirit. In his own room, with natural light coming from the east-facing window, he began to draw again. This time, his paintings were no longer gloomy, but full of color. Laura saw in every stroke of his brush the revival of hope. When the school held an art exhibition for students, Ethan boldly submitted a painting of a small house with 3 figures standing side by side holding hands. On opening day, he smiled brightly, a smile Laura hadn't seen in a long time. Sophie also had the chance to pursue her passion. She joined the school band and was chosen to play clarinet in the winter concert. Laura sat in the stands, eyes misty, as she listened to the clear sound of the clarinet. At the same time, Sophie practiced hard for the school basketball team. The coach noticed her strong energy and encouraged Sophie to join the inter-school tournament. Laura felt proud to see her daughter shining both in music and on the basketball court. As for herself, Laura also went through a major turning point. Thanks to her responsibility and dedication, she earned the trust of the hospital and was promoted to charge nurse, a role that involved both managing and directly caring for patients. A more stable income gave her peace of mind to plan for her children's future. More importantly, she felt she had finally stepped out of the shadow of dependence to become a solid support for her small family. The new life wasn't perfect, but every day was filled with hope. Every evening, the 3 of them gathered around the small dining table. Ethan excitedly talked about the art club, while Sophie took the chance to share about basketball practice. Laura listened, nodding and smiling, feeling her heart warm with every word her children said. However, Laura also understands that cutting ties completely with her parents is not the solution. Even though the pain is still there, she believes in maintaining a balanced relationship, especially for the kids. After months of silence, Laura agrees to let the grandparents see the children at limited dinners, but with clear conditions. The meetings must take place at a restaurant or neutral location, no more living under the same roof. The first dinner like this happened at a small family diner in the suburbs. Margaret felt a bit awkward seeing Sophie happily showing off the new clarinet her mom bought with her bonus money. Thomas stayed silent for a long time, only occasionally nodding. But Laura held firm to her rules. She wouldn't allow any criticism or comparisons. If her parents wanted to keep a relationship, they had to respect her children. Gradually, Ethan and Sophie also felt more comfortable seeing their grandparents in a healthy environment, no longer feeling belittled. Laura realized that the boundaries she set not only protected her kids but also helped the whole family learn to treat each other more fairly. One evening at the end of December, after a warm dinner at their new home, Laura watched her 2 kids decorating the Christmas tree. The glass ornaments reflected the twinkling lights, and the children's laughter echoed throughout the room. She sat down on the sofa, slowly sipping a hot cup of tea, her heart full of emotion. All the hardships, tears, and confrontations from the past seemed to fade away. Laura understood that the journey ahead still held many challenges. But now, she was no longer afraid. She had proven that a single mother could absolutely build a strong home. Ethan and Sophie not only had a place to call home, but also the chance to grow up, surrounded by love and respect. And for Laura, the most important thing was this moment, seeing her children's happy smiles under the sparkling lights of the tree. Deep down, she knew that she and her kids had truly started a new chapter. A chapter of hope, healing, and genuine love. Laura Mitchell's story is not just about overcoming family favoritism. It's a powerful reminder of what family truly means. In American society, where personal values and equality are highly valued, favoritism and unfairness can still exist even within close family ties, leaving deep wounds. Laura went through tough times when her child was treated like an outsider in his own grandparents' home. She saw the pain in Ethan's eyes when he was pushed aside just over a curtain. She heard Sophie's choked sobs when she was forbidden from playing her clarinet because it disturbed Noah. And most importantly, she realized that staying silent would only hurt these fragile young souls even more. The biggest lesson from this story is that family bonds don't just come from blood. Without fairness and respect, family relationships become a burden instead of a refuge. Laura taught us that sometimes setting boundaries is necessary, not to cut ties completely, but to protect yourself and your children from ongoing harm. She proved an important truth. Family should be a place where you feel valued, not compared. Ethan and Sophie deserve to be loved just as they are, not through biased or imposed standards. When Laura chose to leave, it wasn't betrayal of her parents, but a brave act showing the great responsibility of a mother. This message especially touches the hearts of those who have experienced favoritism in their families. It might be when siblings are praised more often, or when someone else's child is always favored, while your own efforts are overlooked. The wounds from such favoritism often last for years, leaving you feeling you're never good enough. But Laura's story gives us hope that everyone deserves to be loved fairly. From this, we also see another truth. Love isn't just words. It must be shown through actions. Margaret and Thomas may claim they love all their grandchildren, but their behavior made Ethan and Sophie feel excluded. Meanwhile, Laura's consistent actions proved that true love always comes with fairness and respect. Take a moment to pause and think about your own family. Have you ever felt compared to your siblings or relatives? Have you witnessed favoritism towards someone in your family that hurt others? And if you're a parent, have you ever wondered if you've treated your children fairly? This story doesn't encourage you to cut ties with loved ones, but to courageously set boundaries when needed. Sometimes, to keep the peace, we choose to endure. But prolonged endurance can damage self-esteem and hurt innocent children. Only when we dare to stand up can we protect the values and dignity of our family. Laura found the strength to say enough is enough. And because of that, she and her children had a new beginning, where love was truly nurtured. This is proof that the hardest step often leads to freedom. Now, I want to hear your thoughts, Crying Inside viewers. Have you ever faced bias within your own family? Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, you're never good enough in the eyes of your parents or relatives? If you were in Laura's situation, would you choose to leave to protect your children? Or would you stay and sacrifice yourself just to keep family peace? Please share your story in the comments below. Every share is not just a relief for you, but can also be encouragement for those going through similar experiences. Family can hurt you, but it can also be a place of healing. And sometimes, you're the one who has to decide which kind your family will be. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's story on Crying Inside. We know there were moments when you might have seen yourself or a loved one in every detail. These stories aren't just to retell. They remind us that family, fairness, and love are the most important foundations in life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss any new videos where we continue sharing real stories about family, emotions, and meaningful lessons. We always appreciate every comment and share from you because that's how we connect and build a community where empathy and listening come first. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing isn't to keep enduring, but to know when to walk away to find peace. And on that journey to peace, you are never alone. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next stories on Crying Inside.